Please help! Somebody help my daughter! The scream, raw and sharp, tore through the cheerful morning murmur of Bridgewater Park. It was a sound of pure terror, a blade of panic that sliced through the laughter of children and the soft rustle of leaves. Heads snapped up. Joggers slowed their pace. For a split second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Rowan Adler froze, his hand tightening on the strap of the worn leather portfolio tucked under his arm. 3 blocks away, the gleaming glass tower of Hawthorne Industries scraped the sky. In 45 minutes, he had the interview that was supposed to change everything. The final round, his one shot at clawing his way back from the brink, his only hope of paying for the surgery that haunted his every waking thought. But in front of him, not 50 feet away, a little girl was dying. He saw her clearly now, a small figure in a bright yellow dress, her body rigid with a silent, desperate struggle. Her face was a terrifying shade of dusky blue, her eyes wide with a horror no child should ever know. A nanny, wild-eyed and useless with panic, hovered over her, her screams drawing a crowd of frozen, horrified onlookers. Rowan's heart hammered against his ribs. "Don't get involved," a desperate voice in his head pleaded. "You can't be late. Not today. Think of Clara." The image of his own daughter, her smile so brave from the seat of her wheelchair, flashed through his mind. He had promised her this morning. He'd knelt beside her, straightened the ribbon in her hair, and looked into her trusting brown eyes. "This is it, sweet pea," he'd whispered, his voice thick with a hope that felt fragile as glass. "This is the one. If I get this job, we're going to get you that surgery." I promise. Clara had reached out, her small, warm hand closing over his. "You'll be great, Daddy. You're the smartest person in the world." Her unwavering faith was both his greatest strength and his heaviest burden. The cost of the surgery, $250,000, was a mountain he couldn't see the top of. This job, a junior engineering position that was miles below his old skill level, was the first step, the only foothold he could find. Now that foothold was crumbling. The little girl in the park let out a final, strangled gasp, a wet, rattling sound that broke the spell of the crowd. To hell with it. His feet were moving before the thought was even complete, shoving past the wall of stunned faces. Time seemed to warp, the seconds stretching into an eternity. He saw every detail. The half-eaten slice of apple on the ground, the frantic, useless pats the nanny was giving the girl's back, the darkening blue of the child's lips. He reached them in 3 long strides, his voice cutting through the nanny's hysteria with a calm authority he didn't feel. "Let me help. I know what to do." He didn't wait for an answer. Dropping his portfolio, he knelt behind the little girl, wrapping his arms around her small, trembling torso. He made a fist, placed it just above her navel, and drove it inward and upward with a sharp, controlled thrust. It was a movement he had practiced 100 times on a dummy in a first aid class, a class he'd taken right after Clara's accident, terrified of all the ways the world could hurt a child. Once, nothing. He adjusted his grip, his mind a quiet storm of focus. The distant sound of a siren wailed, too far away to matter. The girl's body was going limp in his arms. He thrust again. Harder this time. A small object, wet and slick, shot out of her mouth and landed on the grass. It was followed by a ragged, desperate sob of air as the girl's lungs spasmed, finally able to draw a breath. Color, beautiful and pink, flooded back into her cheeks. She collapsed against him, her thin frame shaking with deep, shuddering coughs. A collective gasp of relief rippled through the crowd. The nanny fell to her knees, weeping with gratitude. "Oh, thank you. Thank you, God. Aria, baby, are you okay?" The little girl, Aria, nodded weakly, her eyes, glassy with tears, finding Rowan's. He gave her a shaky, reassuring smile, his own adrenaline starting to recede, leaving a cold dread in its place. "You were very brave," he said softly. He looked at his watch. 9:08 a.m. His interview was at 9:15. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. His suit was wrinkled. There was a grass stain on his knee, and a fine sheen of sweat coated his forehead. He looked like a man who had just wrestled a demon, not a professional about to walk into the most important meeting of his life. "I need to get his name," the nanny was saying, fumbling for her phone. "My boss she'll want to thank you herself. She's on her way right now." Rowan's heart sank. He couldn't wait. He couldn't explain. Every second he stood here was another nail in the coffin of his future, of Clara's future. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. But maybe, just maybe, if he ran, he could still make it. He scooped up his portfolio from the grass. "She'll be fine," he said, his voice strained. "Just keep her calm. I have to go." Before the nanny could protest, before anyone could stop him, he turned and ran. He didn't look back. He just ran, the sound of the little girl's coughing and the distant siren fading behind him as he raced toward the glass tower that held the last remnants of his hope. He burst through the revolving doors of Hawthorne Industries at 9:20 a.m., his breath coming in ragged gasps, his tie askew, and his carefully constructed composure shattered into a million pieces. The cool, sterile air of the marble lobby felt like a different planet from the raw life and death struggle in the park. A woman at the reception desk looked up, her expression shifting from polite indifference to clear disapproval as she took in his disheveled state. He barely noticed. His eyes were locked on the man striding toward him from the elevator bank, a man with a severe haircut, a perfectly tailored suit, and a face set in lines of permanent impatience. A small gold pin on his lapel read, "Leland Kincaid, VP of Operations." This was the man he was supposed to meet. Rowan's heart plummeted. He opened his mouth to explain, to somehow make sense of the last 20 minutes, but Leland Kincaid held up a hand, stopping him cold. "Don't bother," Kincaid said, his voice dripping with disdain. He glanced pointedly at the large digital clock on the wall. "Your interview was at 9:15. It is now 9:20. At Hawthorne Industries, we value punctuality. It's a sign of respect, a sign of preparedness. You, Mr. He glanced down at a tablet in his hand. "Adler, you have shown neither—" "Sir, please, if you'll just let me explain," Rowan pleaded, his voice hoarse. There was an emergency in the park. A little girl was choking. Kincaid cut him off with a dismissive wave. "I'm not interested in excuses. I'm interested in results. And the first result I expect from a potential employee is the ability to show up on time." "You failed." He gestured toward the door with a flick of his wrist. "The interview is canceled. Please see yourself out." The finality in his tone was absolute. There was no appeal, no room for reason. The door to his future, to Clara's future, had just been slammed shut in his face. Numb with shock and disbelief, Rowan could only stand there as Leland Kincaid turned his back and walked away without a second glance, leaving him alone in the vast, silent lobby, the echo of his failure ringing in his ears. For a moment, Rowan couldn't move. The chill of the polished marble floor seemed to seep into his bones, freezing him in place. The world outside the towering glass walls was bright and busy, people moving with purpose, living lives that hadn't just shattered. Inside, there was only the vast, echoing silence of his failure. The security guard by the door watched him with a look of detached pity, a look Rowan was starting to know all too well. He finally forced his legs to move, his steps leaden as he pushed back through the revolving doors. The city air, which had felt charged with possibility an hour ago, was now just thick and suffocating. He walked without direction, the crisp suit feeling like a costume for a part he'd failed to win. Leland Kincaid's words played on a cruel loop in his mind. Not interested in excuses. You failed. He had failed. He had saved a life, and in doing so, had lost everything. The irony was a bitter pill he couldn't swallow. What would he tell Clara? How could he look into her hopeful eyes and tell her that he'd thrown away her chance to walk because he'd stopped to help a stranger? The thought was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. He leaned against the cold stone of a building, the portfolio slipping from his numb fingers and landing on the pavement with a soft thud. He had never felt so utterly alone. High above the city, on the 50th floor of the Hawthorne Industries Tower, Evangeline Hawthorne felt a familiar prickle of irritation. The man across the boardroom table, a senior executive from her acquisitions department, had used the word synergy for the fourth time in 10 minutes. It was a word she despised, a lazy, meaningless piece of corporate jargon used to obscure a lack of concrete data. "Cut to the chase, Martin," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying an edge that made the executive flinch. "I don't need the poetry. I need the numbers. Will acquiring Omnicorp give us a market advantage, or will it be a drain on our resources for the next 3 quarters? Yes or no?" Martin stammered, shuffling his papers. This was Evangeline's world, a kingdom of logic and control, built from calculated risks and ruthless efficiency. Since her husband's death 4 years ago, the company had become her fortress. It was a place of order, a place where every problem had a solution if you were smart enough and tough enough to find it. Emotions were a liability here. They were messy, unpredictable. They were for other people. Her phone, set on the polished mahogany table, vibrated with a unique, urgent buzz she had assigned to only one person, Arya's nanny, Maria. She ignored it. Maria knew the rule. Never call during a board meeting unless the building was on fire. It buzzed again, insistent. A cold knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She held up a finger, silencing Martin mid-sentence. "Excuse me." She answered the call, her voice clipped. "Maria, this had better be important." "Mrs. Hawthorne?" "Oh, thank God." The nanny's voice was a choked, hysterical sob. "It's Arya." We were in the park. She was eating an apple. And she started choking. She couldn't breathe. Her face, oh, Mrs. Hawthorne, it was blue. The boardroom, the acquisitions, the entire $50 billion company simply vanished. Evangeline's universe narrowed to a single, terrifying point. Her daughter. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all its corporate authority, leaving only the raw fear of a mother. "Where is she? Is she breathing now?" "Maria, talk to me." "She's okay." A man in the park saved her. He just appeared and he knew what to do. "The ambulance is here, but she's breathing. She's fine." But she was so scared. Evangeline was already on her feet, grabbing her purse, her mind a whirlwind. "Stay where you are." "I'm on my way." She ended the call and turned to the stunned boardroom, her face a pale, unreadable mask. "The meeting is over." She didn't wait for a response, her Louboutin heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor as she raced for her private elevator. In his own silent, sterile office, Leland Kincaid was feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He had upheld the standard. He had protected the company from the kind of undisciplined riffraff that weakened an organization from within. Punctuality was the first and most basic test of character. Adler had failed it. End of story. To properly document the incident for Human Resources, he pulled up the security feed from the lobby. Time-stamped 9:20 a.m. He wanted a clear screenshot of Adler's unprofessional, disheveled appearance to attach to the file. As the footage loaded, a news alert popped up in the corner of his screen. "Good Samaritan saves choking child in Bridgewater Park." Curiosity piqued, he clicked the link. A local news crew had arrived just minutes after the event. The video showed paramedics checking on a little girl wrapped in a blanket, her face tear-streaked but pink with life. The camera panned over a frantic-looking nanny and then zoomed in on a blurry cell phone picture someone in the crowd had taken of the hero just before he ran off. It was a man in a slightly too large suit, leaning over the child. His back was mostly to the camera, but as the image sharpened, Leland felt a cold dread wash over him. He knew that cheap suit. He knew that worn leather portfolio lying on the grass beside them. He swiveled his chair back to the security feed. There was Rowan Adler, standing before the reception desk, his face pale with desperation, wearing the exact same suit. It was him. Leland's blood ran cold. He quickly cross-referenced the girl's name mentioned in the news report, Aria, with the company's executive family directory. His screen lit up with a single horrifying result. Aria Hawthorne, daughter of Evangeline Hawthorne, CEO. A wave of nausea hit him. He, Leland Kincaid, had just thrown the man who saved his boss's daughter out of the building like a piece of trash. He pictured the conversation. "Why didn't you hire him, Leland?" "Well, Evangeline, he was 5 minutes late." His career, his reputation, his entire future at this company would be incinerated, unless she never found out. His mind raced, a cold, predatory cunning taking over. Evangeline didn't know the man's name. The news report called him an unidentified hero. Adler had left before anyone could talk to him. There was only one place his name was connected to this building today: the digital application system. With trembling fingers, Leland navigated to the HR portal. He found the candidate list for the junior engineering position. There it was: Rowan Adler. Interview status: attended. He clicked on the file. He saw Adler's resume, his impressive qualifications from years ago, the unexplained gap in his employment. He saw it all. And then, with a sharp, decisive click, he hit delete. A confirmation box appeared. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete this candidate's file?" Leland didn't hesitate. He clicked yes. The file vanished. As far as the system was concerned, Rowan Adler had never applied. He had never been scheduled for an interview. He had never existed. Leland leaned back in his leather chair, his heart still pounding, but the panic was already receding, replaced by a chilling sense of control. He had made a mistake, but he had fixed it. Down in Bridgewater Park, Evangeline arrived to find Aria wrapped in her nanny's arms, shaken but safe. She knelt and pulled her daughter into a fierce embrace, burying her face in Aria's hair, inhaling the scent of her child, and fighting back tears of sheer relief. After the paramedics gave the all-clear, Evangeline stood up, her composure returning, but her eyes held a new, steely resolve. "Maria," she said, her voice low and intense, "tell me everything you know about the man who saved her." The nanny shook her head helplessly. "He was just there." "He was kind, and he ran off before I could even ask his name. He said he had to go." Evangeline's gaze swept over the park, as if she could will him to reappear. An anonymous man had saved the most precious thing in her life and then vanished. He hadn't asked for a reward. He hadn't waited for thanks. He had simply acted. "Find him," she said to the personal security chief she'd summoned on her way over. "Check every traffic camera, every security feed in a 5-block radius. Talk to every person who was here. I don't care what it costs or what it takes. Find the man who saved my daughter." The walk back to his small, second-floor apartment was the longest of Rowan's life. Every passing stranger in a crisp suit, every gleaming corporate building, felt like a personal accusation. He was an imposter who had dared to dream for a single morning. Now, the dream was over, and the gray, unforgiving reality of his life settled back over him like a shroud. He stopped at the bottom of the stairs to his building, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He had to pull it together. Clara couldn't see him like this. She was the one thing in his life that was pure and good, and he would not let his own despair poison her hope. He forced his lips into a smile that felt like a grimace, straightened his shoulders, and began the climb. He found her by the window, her small hands pressed against the glass as she watched for him. Her wheelchair was parked beside a table laden with drawings she'd made, colorful fantasies of gardens she could run in and trees she could climb. When she saw him, her face lit up with a brilliant, unreserved joy that sent a fresh pang of guilt through his chest. "Daddy, you're back!" she called out. wheeling herself expertly around the small coffee table to meet him at the door. "How did it go? Did you get it? Are you going to be a super engineer again?" He knelt down in front of her, forcing the fake smile to stay in place. He smoothed a stray strand of hair from her forehead, his heart aching. "Hey, sweet pea. It's not that fast. They have to talk to all the other people first." "But they liked you, right?" she pressed, her eyes wide and searching his. She was too smart, too perceptive. She could always read the shadows behind his eyes. "I think so," he lied, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "I did my best. We'll just have to wait and see." Clara tilted her head, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. She sensed it, the hollow note in his voice, the tension in his shoulders. But she had learned long ago not to push her father when he was trying to be strong for her. Instead, she reached out and wrapped her arms around his neck, hugging him tight. "Okay, Daddy," she whispered into his ear, "but they'd be silly not to pick you." He held her close, burying his face in her hair, grateful for her unconditional love and ashamed of the lie he was telling to protect it. For now, he could pretend. But pretense didn't pay the rent, and it certainly didn't pay for a $250,000 surgery. In her penthouse office, which occupied the entire top floor of the Hawthorne Tower, Evangeline stared at a grainy, pixelated image on a massive screen. It was the cell phone picture of Rowan, blown up until it was an abstract collection of squares. Her head of security, a former FBI agent named Graves, stood beside her. "He's a ghost, Evangeline," Graves said, his tone grim. "He didn't use a credit card or a transit pass in the area. No one in the park recognized him. He walked in, saved your daughter's life, and vanished into thin air." "That's not acceptable," Evangeline stated, her voice dangerously calm. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to. "The man has a tear on the sleeve of his jacket, and he's carrying a portfolio. He was likely coming from, or going to, a job interview. I want a list of every company that was holding interviews within a 10-block radius of that park this morning." Graves nodded, already typing into his tablet. "I'll get on it." After he left, Evangeline walked over to the small private room adjoining her office, where Aria was resting on a plush sofa, drawing in a sketchbook. She looked up as her mother entered, her earlier trauma replaced by a quiet pensiveness. "Are you still looking for the man?" Aria asked. Evangeline sat on the edge of the sofa. "I am. I need to thank him." "He was sad, Mommy," Aria said softly, not looking up from her drawing. Evangeline paused. "Sad? What do you mean, honey?" "His eyes," Aria said, finally meeting her mother's gaze. "They looked like Daddy's did sometimes, like he was carrying something heavy." She held up her sketchbook. She had drawn a picture of a stick figure with a suit and brown hair, leaning over a smaller figure in a yellow dress. Around the man's shoulders, she had drawn a large, gray, lumpy cloud. "He was nice, though," she added. "He told me I was brave." A strange emotion tugged at Evangeline. This man, this hero, wasn't just some random person. He was someone with his own story, his own burdens. Aria's description made him real, and it deepened Evangeline's resolve. This wasn't just about paying a debt anymore. It was about connecting with the one person who had shown a moment of pure, selfless humanity when it mattered most. Down on the 48th floor, Leland Kincaid felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple as he read the email that had just been sent to all senior staff. Subject: a personal request. From Evangeline Hawthorne, CEO Team. As some of you may be aware, my daughter, Aria, was involved in a medical emergency today. Her life was saved by the quick actions of an unidentified man. This man is a hero, and I am asking for your help in finding him. Leland's hands felt clammy. He was trapped in a lie of his own making, a lie that grew more dangerous by the hour. All it would take was one person from HR, one scheduling assistant, to remember the name Adler, and his entire world would collapse. He spent the rest of the afternoon fielding calls, his answers clipped and irritable, jumping at every shadow. He was a man sitting on a time bomb, and the clock was ticking. That evening, after putting Clara to bed with a story he couldn't remember reading, Rowan sat at his small kitchen table. The forced cheerfulness of the past few hours had drained him completely, leaving behind a profound emptiness. The lie he'd told his daughter felt heavier now, a debt he would have to pay later. He opened his laptop, the screen illuminating his tired face, his old resume full of impressive projects and qualifications from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else, stared back at him. He had been so proud of it that morning. Now, it was meaningless. With a heavy sigh, he closed the file and opened a web browser. He bypassed the engineering and tech job boards, his pride already too bruised to face them. He scrolled down, past listings for accountants and project managers, until he reached the bottom of the employment food chain. Warehouse associate, night shift. Must be able to lift 50 pounds, dishwasher needed for busy downtown restaurant. No experience necessary. General laborer, construction site. Each listing was a small, sharp stab to his soul. This was his reality now. This was all that was left. He stared at the screen, the hope of the morning now a distant, mocking memory, and began to fill out an application for a job that would bury him and his daughter's dreams under an avalanche of cardboard boxes in the dark. 2 weeks later, the crisp suit was hanging in the back of Rowan's closet, a relic from a life that no longer felt real. His new uniform was a pair of steel-toed boots and a faded t-shirt that smelled perpetually of dust and cardboard. His days of designing schematics had been replaced by nights of scanning barcodes. The warehouse was a vast, cavernous world of concrete and steel, filled with the endless hum of conveyor belts and the sharp beeps of pallet jacks. Rowan worked the night shift, a grueling 10-hour stretch of lifting, stacking, and loading. It was mindless, back-breaking work, and it paid just enough to keep the lights on and food on the table. He barely saw Clara. He'd come home just as she was waking up, his body aching, and collapse into bed. They communicated through notes left on the refrigerator, a painful substitute for the easy chatter that had once filled their small apartment. The physical exhaustion was a blessing in a way. It left him too tired to think, too drained to mourn the career that had been stolen from him. But then the letter arrived. It was from the office of Dr. Alistair Finch, the renowned neurosurgeon who had developed the experimental procedure Clara needed. It was a sterile, form letter invitation to a preoperative consultation to discuss the financial framework and schedule the procedure. They had an opening in 6 weeks. Rowan stared at the letter, his blood turning to ice. Financial framework. It was such a polite, clinical term for a mountain of money he had no hope of ever climbing. The warehouse job paid him in a year what the surgery would cost in a single afternoon. The letter wasn't an offer of hope. It was a countdown to his ultimate failure as a father. A new, frantic desperation began to claw at the edges of his exhaustion. Evangeline Hawthorne did not like to fail. In her world, failure was not an outcome. It was a temporary problem to be solved with more resources, more pressure, and more willpower. But her hero remained a ghost. "We're hitting a wall," Graves admitted, standing before her desk. He slid a tablet across the polished surface. "Here's the list you wanted." Every company that was holding interviews within the designated radius on that day, Evangeline scanned the list of names. Her eye stopped on one. Hawthorne Industries. A flicker of intuition sparked within her. It was too perfect, too symmetrical. "Did you cross-reference our own interview logs for that morning?" "I did," Graves confirmed. "I spoke with HR, who deferred to the department head. The only major interviews that morning were in operations. Vice President Kincaid assured me personally that all his scheduled candidates arrived. One canceled the day before, another was 5 minutes early. None of them fit the description. He was quite clear that anyone arriving late would have been turned away immediately, and there's no record of that happening." Evangeline leaned back, a flicker of disappointment crossing her features. Kincaid was a rigid, infuriating man. But he was meticulous. If he said no one was late, then no one was late. Another dead end. The symmetry was just a coincidence. "Fine," she said, the word clipped. "Keep searching the public feeds." She felt a gnawing frustration. She had the power to reshape skylines and shift global markets, but she couldn't find one man in her own city. Arya's description of him, his eyes looked sad, haunted her. It suggested a man of substance, of depth, not a man who would simply disappear. Later that afternoon, she decided to leave the office early, a rare occurrence. She found Arya in the back of her chauffeured sedan, looking quietly out the window as the city slid by. Evangeline watched her daughter, seeing the faint shadow the morning in the park had left behind. "What are you thinking about, sweetie?" she asked softly. "The man," Arya said, her voice small. "The one who helped me." She turned from the window, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Mommy, I think he dropped something." When he picked me up, Evangeline's attention sharpened. "Dropped something?" What was it? It was loud. "Like keys," Arya said, her memory slowly unspooling. When he picked up his bag, it fell out. It was brown leather, and it had a little silver car on it. An old one. Like in Grandpa's pictures, Evangeline leaned forward, her heart starting to beat faster. "A little silver car? On a keychain?" Arya nodded. "A pickup truck with big round lights." It was the first tangible clue they'd had in 2 weeks, a specific visual detail. It was almost nothing, a needle in a continent-sized haystack, but it was something. The image of the hero was no longer just a sad-eyed man in a cheap suit. He was a sad-eyed man in a cheap suit who drove an old pickup truck. She immediately called Graves. "Graves, I have a new lead," she said, her voice electric with renewed purpose. "Forget the interviews. Forget the public surveillance. I want you to run a search through the DMV database." "What are we looking for?" he asked. "A needle in a haystack," she replied, a hint of a smile touching her lips for the first time in days. "I want a list of every registered pre-1990s Ford or Chevy pickup truck in a 50-mile radius of this city, and I want to know who owns them." The hunt was back on. In a warehouse across town, surrounded by towering shelves of merchandise, Rowan Adler scanned another box, oblivious. He was just a number, a barcode in a system, completely unaware that the most powerful woman in the city was now sifting through thousands of names, getting closer and closer to the one that mattered. His. The days bled into a grueling, monotonous cycle. Rowan's world shrank to the 4 walls of his apartment and the endless aisles of the warehouse. He'd come to measure time not in hours, but in the number of boxes he lifted, the dull ache in his lower back, and the brief, precious moments he had with Clara before sleep claimed him. He was a ghost in his own life, haunted by the future he was supposed to be building. One night during his 30-minute break, he sat on a cold concrete loading dock, scrolling through news on his phone. An article caught his eye. Hawthorne Industries unveils groundbreaking eye integration for automated systems. He read about the complex algorithms, the revolutionary mechanical designs, and felt a familiar, painful spark of intellectual curiosity. He could see the system in his mind, envisioning the stress points, the potential for optimization. He saw 3 ways he could improve the efficiency of their primary drive mechanism just by reading the description. The thought was so clear, so instinctual, that he almost sketched it out on a napkin. Then he stopped, a bitter laugh catching in his throat. Who was he kidding? He wasn't an engineer anymore. He was a box packer. He closed the article, the spark dying as quickly as it had appeared, and went back to work. In Evangeline Hawthorne's office, the hunt had become a formidable data mining operation. The initial DMV search had returned over 4,000 names. "It's a needle in a haystack," Graves had warned. "Then we get a bigger magnet," Evangeline had replied without looking up from her work. For days, Graves and his team cross-referenced the list, filtering out the noise. They eliminated women, men over 50, and anyone with a registration address outside the city limits. The list shrank to a few hundred. Then they began the painstaking work of running soft background checks, looking for anything that might fit the profile of their mystery man. They were looking for a ghost, and all they had were statistics. Meanwhile, Leland Kincaid was living on a knife's edge. He saw Graves striding in and out of Evangeline's office multiple times a day. He caught snippets of words in the hallway. DMV, database, short list. He didn't know what they were looking for, but the intensity of the search made his skin crawl. The lie he had told was a living thing now. A predator that was always stalking him from the corner of his eye. His work suffered. He snapped at his subordinates, made careless errors in reports, his focus shattered by a constant, low-grade terror of exposure. Then came the breakthrough. "I think we've got him," Graves said, placing a single file on Evangeline's desk. "It's a long shot, but he fits." Evangeline opened the folder. The name on the top read, Rowan Adler. She looked at the DMV photo. It was 5 years old, taken in better days. The man in the picture had a tired but gentle smile. His eyes, even in the flat, institutional lighting of the DMV, held a familiar depth, a quiet sadness. It was the face Arya had described. Age 35, Graves continued, pointing to the details. Address is a low-income apartment complex on the east side. He's a widower, one daughter, age 8. Her name is Clara. Evangeline felt a jolt. A daughter, of course. It made a strange kind of sense. Perhaps only a parent could understand the instinct that drove him to act so selflessly. "What does he do for a living?" she asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Graves said. "According to his records, he's a brilliant mechanical engineer. Top of his class at MIT, holds 3 patents. But his employment history goes dark 4 years ago, right after his wife died. Since then, nothing. His professional status is listed as inactive. An engineer, an unemployed engineer." The pieces began to click into place with an unnerving, perfect logic. A man like that would be desperate for a good job. A job like the one at her company. "Graves," she said, her voice low. "Did Rowan Adler have an interview scheduled here 2 weeks ago?" "I can check again," he said, pulling out his tablet. But Kincaid was adamant. "Check a different way," she commanded, an icy premonition creeping over her. "Don't check the internal logs. They can be altered. Check the external servers. Find out if an interview confirmation was ever emailed to a Rowan Adler." Graves's fingers flew across the screen. He bypassed the main HR portal and went deep into the email server archives, searching for any communication sent to an external address associated with that name. After a moment, he stopped. His face went pale. "Evangeline," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "you need to see this." He turned the tablet toward her. On the screen was a cached copy of an automated email, sent from Hawthorne Industries' HR department 2.5 weeks prior. "Dear Mr. Adler," it began, "we are pleased to confirm your final interview for the junior engineer operations position. Your appointment is scheduled for 9:15 a.m. on September 16th with Leland Kincaid, VP of Operations." The world seemed to tilt. The proof was right there, in cold digital print. Rowan Adler, the man who saved her daughter, the sad-eyed hero she had been searching for, had been scheduled to be in her building on that very morning. And Leland Kincaid, her trusted vice president, had looked her in the eye and lied. He hadn't just turned a late candidate away. He had erased him. He had taken this brilliant, desperate man who had just performed a selfless, heroic act and thrown him back into the darkness. A cold, precise fury, unlike anything she had ever felt, began to build within her. The mystery was solved. But a much darker, more infuriating story was just beginning. She stared at the email, at Rowan Adler's name, and she knew exactly what she had to do next. The silence in Evangeline's office was heavy and cold. Graves stood by, waiting for the inevitable explosion. But it didn't come. Evangeline Hawthorne didn't explode. She focused. The raw, hot emotion of betrayal was already being forged into a tool, sharp and precise. She looked up at Graves, her eyes like chips of ice. "Is Leland Kincaid in the building?" "Yes, he's in a budget meeting on the 48th floor. Tell my assistant to have him brought to the main boardroom in 5 minutes. You and the head of HR will join us. I want this handled by the book." Graves nodded, recognizing the quiet deadliness in her tone. This wasn't just a firing. This was going to be an eradication. Leland Kincaid entered the boardroom with a confident stride, though a knot of anxiety tightened in his gut. A summons to the main boardroom was never a casual affair. He saw Evangeline at the head of the long polished table, with Graves and the head of HR flanking her like stone sentinels. The room's massive screen was dark. "Leland, thank you for joining us," Evangeline said, her voice unnervingly pleasant. "Please, have a seat." He sat, his mouth suddenly dry. "2 weeks ago," Evangeline began, folding her hands on the table, "I asked you a direct question about your interview schedule for the morning of September 16th. You assured me personally that all your candidates were accounted for and that no one had been turned away. Is that correct?" "Yes, that's correct," Leland said, his voice a little too loud. "My records are impeccable." "Are they?" Evangeline asked softly. She nodded to Graves. The massive screen behind her flickered to life, displaying the email confirmation sent to Rowan Adler. Leland's face lost all its color. "Our server archives seem to tell a different story," Evangeline continued, her voice never rising. "This confirms an interview for a Mr. Rowan Adler at 9:15 a.m. with you." Leland stammered, his mind scrambling for a lifeline. A system glitch, it must have been, or the candidate was a no-show. Yes, that's it. Now I recall. He never showed the lie was pathetic, and he knew it the second it left his mouth. Evangeline's expression didn't change, but her eyes hardened. "A no-show," she repeated, the words dripping with contempt. "That's fascinating, because at the exact time Mr. Adler was supposed to be a no-show for his interview with you, he was otherwise engaged." She clicked a remote. The email vanished, replaced by the blurry cell phone photo from the park. The man in the cheap suit, leaning over her daughter. "He was saving my daughter's life." The air was sucked out of the room. Leland stared at the image, his jaw slack, his carefully constructed world imploding. He had nowhere left to run. The lie was exposed, his callousness laid bare. I didn't know," he whispered, the words empty and desperate. "No," Evangeline said, standing up. Her voice was finally infused with the cold, controlled fury she'd been holding back. "You didn't know. You didn't care. You saw a man who was 5 minutes late, and you judged him. You saw a man who was disheveled from a heroic act, and you saw only a failure. You are the head of a department of over 500 people, and you lack the most basic human decency and judgment to lead them." She looked at the head of HR. "Leland Kincaid's employment at Hawthorne Industries is terminated, effective immediately. He will be escorted from the building. His severance will be the bare minimum required by law." She then turned her final, dismissive gaze on Leland. "You are a liability this company can no longer afford. Get out of my boardroom." Security guards appeared at the door as if summoned by magic. Leland, his face a mask of disbelief and impotent rage, could do nothing but allow himself to be led away, his career at Hawthorne Industries ending not with a bang, but with a quiet, humiliating exit. Miles away, Rowan sat at his kitchen table, the weight of the world on his shoulders. The bills were piled high, a monument to his failure. The letter from Dr. Finch's office lay on top, its clinical font mocking his helplessness. Clara was asleep in her room, but her presence filled the small apartment, a constant, loving reminder of everything he was failing to provide for her. He was running the numbers for the 10th time, a pointless, masochistic exercise. After rent, utilities, and groceries, his warehouse pay left him with almost nothing. Saving $250,000 was as likely as flapping his arms and flying to the moon. Hopelessness was a physical thing, a cold, heavy blanket that smothered him. His phone buzzed, vibrating against the worn wood of the table. An unknown number with a downtown prefix. He sighed, assuming it was another debt collector, and prepared to let it go to voicemail. But something made him pick it up. "Hello?" he answered, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Good evening. Am I speaking with Mr. Rowan Adler?" The voice on the other end was female, professional, and polite. "This is he. Mr. Adler, my name is Susan Chen. I am the executive assistant to Evangeline Hawthorne, the CEO of Hawthorne Industries." Rowan sat up straighter, his mind reeling with confusion. Hawthorne Industries? The CEO? It had to be a mistake. Or perhaps it was a formal follow-up to his rejection, a final twist of the knife. "Yes," he said cautiously. "Mr. Adler," the assistant continued, her tone unwavering. "Mrs. Hawthorne would like to request a meeting with you. She would be grateful if you could come to her office tomorrow morning at your earliest convenience, 9 a.m., if that's suitable." Rowan was speechless. He stared at the wall, at a crayon drawing of a smiling sun Clara had taped up last year. None of this made any sense. Why would the CEO of the company that had so coldly rejected him want to meet? Had Kincaid's decision been overruled? It seemed impossible. He was a ghost in their system, a deleted file. "Mr. Adler, are you still there?" Yes, I'm here," he stammered, his heart beginning to pound with a confusing mixture of dread and a tiny, dangerous flicker of hope. 9 a.m. is fine. Excellent. I'll email you the details. Mrs. Hawthorne looks forward to meeting you." The line went dead. Rowan slowly lowered the phone, his mind racing. He had no idea that the woman he was about to meet was the mother of the little girl in the yellow dress. He had no idea that his entire life was balanced on the precipice of a single conversation. All he knew was that for the first time in 2 weeks, a door that had been slammed shut had inexplicably, impossibly, creaked back open. Sleep was a luxury Rowan couldn't afford that night. His mind was a chaotic storm of questions and improbable scenarios. Why would the CEO want to see him? Had Kincaid been overruled? Was it a trap? He cycled through every possibility until the first gray light of dawn crept through his window. He stood before his closet, staring at the lone suit. It felt different this time. Not a symbol of hope, but a shroud of a past failure. Still, it was all he had. As he knotted the cheap tie, he caught his reflection in the mirror. The man looking back was tired, worn down, but in his eyes there was a flicker of something he hadn't seen in a long time. Cautious curiosity. Clara was awake when he went to her room. She was already in her chair, a book open in her lap. "You have another meeting?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. He knelt beside her, deciding on the simplest truth. Yes, with a very important lady at the same company, he didn't add anything else. He wouldn't burden her with a hope that could be false. She just nodded and gave him a quick, fierce hug. "Good luck, Daddy." When Rowan walked into the lobby of Hawthorne Industries for the second time, the air felt charged. He half expected to be thrown out again. He approached the same receptionist, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. "Rowan Adler," he said, his voice quiet. "I have a 9 a.m. meeting with Mrs. Hawthorne." The receptionist's entire demeanor changed. A warm, professional smile lit up her face. "Of course, Mr. Adler. We've been expecting you." She spoke into an intercom, and a moment later, a different woman, poised and impeccably dressed, emerged from the elevator bank. It was the assistant he'd spoken to on the phone. "Mr. Adler, a pleasure to meet you," she said, shaking his hand. "I'm Susan Chen. If you'll follow me, Mrs. Hawthorne is ready for you." He was led not to the standard elevators, but to a private one operated by a key card. As the polished steel doors slid shut, the elevator began its silent, rapid ascent. The city sprawled out beneath them, shrinking with every floor. It felt like he was rising into a different world, a place of clouds and power. He didn't belong. The doors opened directly into a reception area that was larger than his entire apartment. Susan led him past a vast mahogany desk and through a set of tall double doors into the corner office. The room was breathtaking. 2 walls were pure glass, offering a panoramic view that seemed to stretch on forever. The space was elegant and minimalist, dominated by a large, clean desk and a few pieces of modern art. A woman stood by the window, her back to him, silhouetted against the morning sun. "Mr. Adler," she said, turning around. "Thank you for coming." She was younger than he'd expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet authority that needed no introduction. She wasn't smiling, but her expression was open, her gaze direct. Rowan's rehearsed apology died on his lips. "Mrs. Hawthorne, thank you for seeing me. Please," she said, gesturing to a pair of comfortable-looking chairs away from the desk. "Have a seat." He sat, perching on the edge of the cushion, his portfolio clutched in his lap like a shield. He decided to face the issue head-on. "Mrs. Hawthorne, before we begin, I feel I owe you an explanation for my tardiness 2 weeks ago. I know there are no excuses, but—" She held up a hand, a gentle but firm gesture that stopped him cold. "Mr. Adler," she said, her voice softening slightly, "this isn't an interview. And I already know why you were late." Rowan frowned, a knot of confusion tightening in his stomach. How could she possibly know? Evangeline's gaze was steady, her next words delivered with quiet, deliberate weight. "My daughter's name is Aria." For a moment, the name didn't register. And then, it hit him like a physical blow. Aria. The little girl in the yellow dress. The choking. The park. He stared at the woman in front of him, the billionaire CEO, and saw a different person entirely. The mother of the child whose life he had held in his hands. The world seemed to tilt and then slam back into focus with stunning, impossible clarity. "You're her mother?" he whispered, the words feeling foreign and inadequate. Evangeline nodded, a flicker of raw emotion finally breaking through her composure. "I am. I've been looking for you for 2 weeks, Mr. Adler. I wanted to thank you." "There's no need," he said automatically, shaking his head. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," she countered, her voice firm. "They wouldn't have." An entire crowd of people stood by and did nothing. "You acted. You saved her life. I can never repay you for that." Rowan was speechless, his mind trying to process the sheer scale of the coincidence. The interview, the girl, the CEO. It was all connected. "After we found out who you were," Evangeline continued, her tone shifting, becoming more serious, "we also discovered that you were supposed to have an interview here that morning. An interview Mr. Kincaid told me never happened." She explained briefly and clinically that Leland Kincaid was no longer with the company, and that his actions were a profound betrayal of everything Hawthorne Industries stood for. "Your application was impressive," she said. "Your patents, your work at your previous firm. You're not a junior engineer, Mr. Adler. You're a leader, an innovator, and you've been sidelined for far too long." She stood up and walked back toward the window, her hands clasped behind her back. "The junior position you applied for is beneath your skill set. However, I have another opening. I'm putting together a new special projects team in our R&D division. A blue sky team, tasked with solving our most complex mechanical and logistical problems. It requires creativity, experience, and the ability to perform under pressure. It requires a leader." She turned back to face him, her eyes locking onto his. "I want you to run it. The position is Director of Mechanical Innovation. The salary will be more than sufficient to take care of your daughter's needs, and our company's health insurance is the best in the country. The job is yours, if you want it." Rowan felt like he was underwater, the words reaching him through a muffled haze. Director. A team. A salary that was more than he used to make in his best years. It was a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. It was the answer to every prayer he'd been afraid to speak aloud. It was Clara's surgery. It was her future. It was everything. He looked at this powerful, grateful woman, and for the first time in 4 years, he saw not an obstacle, but a path, a way forward. He slowly got to his feet, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't hide. "Mrs. Hawthorne," he said, extending his hand, I accept." She took his hand. Her grip was firm, her smile small but genuine. "Welcome to the team, Rowan." Rowan walked out of the Hawthorne Industries Tower and into the bright afternoon sunlight, feeling like he had been reborn. The city that had seemed so hostile and unforgiving just an hour ago now looked vibrant and full of promise. He wasn't just a man with a job. He was a man with a future, with a hope so fierce and brilliant it almost blinded him. He didn't take the bus. He practically floated the 12 blocks back to his apartment, his mind replaying the meeting, the job offer, Evangeline Hawthorne's handshake. Director of Mechanical Innovation. The words tasted like a foreign, beautiful language on his tongue. When he opened the door to his apartment, Clara was right where he'd left her, her book forgotten as she stared at the door, her small face etched with worry. She had been waiting. "Daddy?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt before her, his face breaking into the first genuine, unburdened smile he'd had in years. He took both of her small hands in his. "I got the job, sweet pea," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But that's not even the best part of the story." He told her everything, the whole unbelievable tale. He told her about the little girl in the park, Aria, and how her mother, the most powerful woman in the city, had been searching for him all this time. He told her about the new job, the special team he was going to lead, and the respect he'd been shown. Clara listened, her eyes growing wider with every word. But when he got to the most important part, his voice cracked. "The health insurance, Clara. The salary. It's enough," he whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "It's more than enough. We can call Dr. Finch. We can schedule the surgery for a moment." Clara was silent, her lower lip trembling as she processed the words she had dreamed of hearing for so long. Then, a single tear traced a path down her cheek. "Really, Daddy?" she breathed. I can get the surgery." "Yes," he said, his own tears now falling freely. "Yes, you can. You're going to walk, sweet pea. You're going to run in those gardens you're always drawing." She let out a sob, a sound of pure, overwhelming joy, and threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. Rowan held her tight, the solid, real weight of his daughter in his arms, and felt the last 4 years of struggle and despair finally, blessedly, wash away. A month later, Rowan's life was unrecognizable. His office, adjacent to the main R&D lab, had a glass wall that overlooked a team of a dozen bright, eager engineers. He spent his days on his feet, sketching complex designs on whiteboards, challenging old assumptions, and feeling the dormant parts of his brain spark back to life. He was good at this. He had forgotten how good. The respect from his team was immediate and genuine. He didn't just manage them. He inspired them, his hands-on knowledge and intuitive understanding of mechanics earning their loyalty in weeks. His relationship with Evangeline was professional, but underscored by a current of mutual respect. They met twice a week to discuss the team's progress. In these meetings, he saw the brilliant strategist behind the CEO title. She grasped complex engineering concepts with astonishing speed, her questions always sharp, pushing him and his team to think bigger. She, in turn, saw the passionate innovator she had gambled on. He wasn't just meeting her expectations, he was exceeding them. The first time their professional bubble was breached was on a Tuesday afternoon. Rowan was in Evangeline's office, presenting a preliminary design for a new robotic logistics system. Suddenly the door opened and Aria peeked in. When she saw Rowan, her face broke into a wide smile. "It's you!" she exclaimed, running past her mother and straight to him. She wrapped her arms around his legs in a spontaneous hug. "The man from the park." Rowan, caught by surprise, laughed and gently patted her head. "Hey, Arya. It's good to see you feeling better." Evangeline watched them, a rare, soft smile on her face. "Arya, Mr. Adler and I are in a meeting." "I'm sorry," Arya said, though she didn't look sorry at all. She looked up at Rowan with unabashed admiration. "My mom said you're a super genius now, and that you have a daughter too." "I do," Rowan said, his heart warming. "Her name is Clara." "Is she nice?" "She's the best," he replied simply. The interaction shifted the energy in the room. When Arya left, the formal barrier between them had thinned. "Thank you for being so kind to her," Evangeline said quietly. "She's a great kid," Rowan answered sincerely. "You must be very proud." "I am," Evangeline said, her gaze turning distant for a moment. "It's difficult sometimes, juggling all of this and making sure she knows she's the most important thing. My late husband was much better at it." It was the first time she had ever mentioned her husband to him. The admission was a small offering of vulnerability, and Rowan felt compelled to offer one in return. "I know what you mean," he said softly. "My wife. She was the fun one. The one who made everything an adventure. I'm just the guy who makes sure the homework gets done." They shared a look then, a silent, profound understanding of their shared experience, of loss, of single parenthood, of the heavy weight of being everything to one small person. Later that week, Rowan sat in his new office, the phone to his ear, his heart pounding. He was speaking with Dr. Finch's scheduling nurse. "Yes, that's correct," he said, his voice steady and clear. "We can confirm the financial arrangements. Please schedule the surgery for the earliest possible date." He hung up the phone, a wave of triumphant relief washing over him. It was done. Clara's surgery was scheduled for 6 weeks from today. That afternoon, he received an email from Evangeline. It was brief and to the point. Subject: Dinner, Rowan. "I was hoping you and Clara might join Arya and me for a quiet dinner at my home this Saturday. Nothing formal. I'd like to properly thank you, and Arya is desperate to meet the famous Clara. Best." Evangeline. Rowan stared at the email, a slow smile spreading across his face. It wasn't a corporate invitation. It was personal. It was a step into a new, uncharted territory, and for the first time in a very long time, he wasn't afraid of what came next. The anticipation for the Saturday dinner filled their small apartment with an energy it hadn't felt in years. Clara spent the afternoon meticulously choosing her best dress, a simple blue one with a white collar, and debating which bow she should wear in her hair. Her excitement was infectious, a bright, bubbly thing that made Rowan's own nervousness feel manageable. "Is it a mansion, Daddy?" she asked as he helped her brush her hair. "Like in the movies? With 100 rooms?" "I don't know about 100, sweet pea," he laughed. "But I have a feeling it's going to be pretty big." He was nervous, but not for the reasons he would have been a month ago. He wasn't worried about fitting in or feeling inadequate anymore. His new position had restored a deep sense of self-worth he thought he had lost forever. No, he was nervous because of Evangeline. He was nervous about the way she looked at him sometimes in meetings, a gaze that felt like it saw past the engineer and into the man. He was nervous about the way his heart beat a little faster when she smiled. He drove his old reliable pickup truck through a set of imposing iron gates and up a long, winding driveway. The house that came into view was, in fact, a mansion. It was a stunning piece of modern architecture, all clean lines, glass, and warm stone, nestled into a hillside overlooking the glittering expanse of the city. But as he pulled up to the front, he saw a bright pink bicycle parked carelessly on the manicured lawn and a brightly painted hopscotch court drawn in chalk on the walkway. It wasn't a museum, it was a home. Evangeline opened the door herself before they even had a chance to ring the bell. She was dressed in simple, elegant jeans and a soft cashmere sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail. She looked relaxed, happy, and breathtakingly beautiful. "Rowan, Clara, I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her smile genuine and warm. Just then, Arya came bounding into the entryway. "You're here! Is this Clara?" Clara, suddenly shy, gave a small wave from her chair. Arya's eyes, full of a child's unfiltered curiosity, went to the wheelchair. "Wow," she said, not with pity, but with genuine interest. "Does it go fast?" Clara giggled, her shyness evaporating. "Daddy pushes it fast sometimes. It feels like flying. Can I try?" Arya asked eagerly. And just like that, the ice was broken. Within minutes, the two girls were giggling as Arya carefully pushed Clara through the wide, open-plan living room toward a wall of glass that overlooked a sprawling garden and a sparkling blue pool. Dinner was a relaxed, casual affair served at a large wooden table on a sheltered terrace. The conversation was easy, driven by the girls' cheerful chatter about school, art, and their favorite kinds of ice cream. Rowan and Evangeline found themselves watching their daughters, sharing silent, amused smiles over their heads. It felt less like a formal thank you dinner and more like family. After they ate, the girls, now firm friends, got permission to go to Arya's playroom. As their laughter faded down the hall, a comfortable quiet settled between Rowan and Evangeline. The sun had set, and the city below was a breathtaking carpet of lights. "I haven't had a dinner like this in a very long time," Evangeline said softly, her gaze on the horizon. "So much of my life is scheduled. Boardrooms, investor calls, quarterly reports. This felt real." "I know what you mean," Rowan said. "My life has been nothing but schedules for a while, too. Warehouse shifts, bus timetables, doctor's appointments." He looked at her, his expression full of a gratitude that went far beyond the job. "You changed all that, Evangeline." Using her first name felt both strange and perfectly natural. She turned to face him, her expression serious. "You changed things first, Rowan. You ran toward a crisis when everyone else stood still. You reminded me what this company, what my father, always said was most important: people." She hesitated for a moment. "And you reminded me that there's a world outside of that tower." The air between them grew thick with unspoken things. The city lights reflected in her eyes, and Rowan could see the loneliness she rarely let anyone else witness. He saw the weight she carried, not just as a CEO, but as a widow and a mother. He stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace railing, looking out at the view. She followed, standing beside him. They were close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her, smell the faint, clean scent of her perfume. "Thank you for this," he said, his voice low. "For everything. You didn't just give me a job. You gave me back a part of myself I thought was gone for good. You gave my daughter her future, and you gave my daughter hers," she whispered. She looked up at him, and the rest of the world seemed to fall away. There was no CEO, no engineer. There were just two people, bound by a strange and beautiful twist of fate, who understood each other's loss and loneliness. His hand moved, almost of its own accord, and his fingers gently brushed against hers on the railing. It was a small, tentative touch, but a current of electricity shot through him. She didn't pull away. She simply stood there, her breath catching in her throat. The moment was broken by the sound of the girls' returning laughter. They both stepped back, the spell momentarily shattered. The rest of the evening passed in a warm, happy blur. When it was time to go, Evangeline and Arya walked them to the door. As Rowan was helping Clara into the passenger seat of his truck, Evangeline placed a hand lightly on his arm. "Thank you for coming, Rowan," she said, her voice soft. This meant a lot to me." Her touch lingered for a second before she pulled her hand away, but the feeling of it burned on his skin all the way home. As he drove down the long, winding driveway, leaving the mansion and its warm lights behind, he glanced at Clara, who was already half asleep in her seat, a contented smile on her face. His heart was full. And in that moment, he realized with a clarity that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that his feelings for Evangeline Hawthorne had grown into something far deeper than gratitude. He was falling for her, hard. The journey that had started with a desperate race to an interview had led him somewhere completely unexpected. To the start of a new chapter he never could have imagined writing. The weeks leading up to Clara's surgery were a blur of heightened emotion. At work, the dynamic between Rowan and Evangeline had irrevocably shifted. The professional respect was still there, but it was now interwoven with a deep personal warmth. Their meetings would often drift for a few minutes into conversations about the girls. Their gazes would linger a moment too long across a boardroom table. An accidental brush of hands while looking over a schematic would send a jolt through them both. They were orbiting each other, two stars slowly, inevitably, being pulled into the same gravitational field. The day before the surgery, Evangeline found Rowan staring out his office window, his face pale with a fear he was trying to hide. She didn't knock. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. He turned, a shaky smile on his face. "Pretending to be brave for Clara's sake. Inside, I'm terrified." "You don't have to pretend with me, Rowan," she said, stepping closer. "I get it. The feeling of putting your child's life in someone else's hands. It's the most helpless feeling in the world." She placed a reassuring hand on his arm. And this time, the touch was not accidental. It was a deliberate, comforting gesture. "You won't be alone tomorrow. I'm clearing my schedule. Arya and I will be there with you." Rowan looked at her, his heart swelling with a gratitude so immense it left him breathless. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said simply. "I want to." The morning of the surgery, the hospital waiting room felt cold and sterile. Clara was remarkably calm, her bravery a source of quiet strength for Rowan. Her best friend Arya was by her side, holding her hand tightly until the nurse came to take her to the operating room. "You're going to be so great," Arya whispered, giving Clara one last hug. "When I wake up, we'll race," Clara whispered back, her eyes shining. Then she was gone, and the waiting began. The silence in the room was deafening, punctuated only by the ticking of a clock on the wall. But Rowan wasn't alone. Evangeline sat beside him, a silent, solid presence. She had canceled a keynote speech at a tech conference in Geneva to be there, a fact he'd learned from a disgruntled executive's email. They didn't talk about work. They talked about their lives. He told her stories about his wife, about her infectious laugh and her terrible cooking. She told him about her husband, a brilliant architect who had dreamed of designing buildings that looked like they could fly. They spoke of love and loss, of the crushing weight of grief and the fierce, protective love they had for their daughters. In the crucible of that hospital waiting room, all pretense fell away. They were not a CEO and her director. They were just Rowan and Evangeline, two souls who had found an unlikely harbor in each other. Hours felt like lifetimes. Finally, a man in blue scrubs walked into the room. It was Dr. Finch. Rowan shot to his feet, his heart in his throat. The surgeon pulled down his mask and broke into a wide, reassuring smile. "It was a complex procedure," he began, "but it could not have gone better. The surgery was a complete success. Her recovery will take time and a lot of physical therapy, but your daughter is going to make a full recovery. She's going to walk, Mr. Adler." The relief that washed over Rowan was a physical force, so powerful it made his knees weak. The tension he had been carrying for 4 years, the constant, grinding fear, finally released its grip. Tears streamed down his face, and he let out a choked sob of pure, unadulterated joy. He turned to Evangeline, his eyes blurry, needing to share this impossible moment with the one person who truly understood. She was already there, her own eyes shining with tears for him. For Clara. He didn't think. He just acted. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her shoulder, and she held him tightly, her hand stroking his back. When he finally pulled away, he looked down at her beautiful, tear-streaked face. The gratitude, the respect, the friendship, the longing, it all coalesced into one undeniable truth. He framed her face with his hands and gently, tentatively, he kissed her. It was a kiss of profound relief and explosive chemistry, a kiss that had been waiting to happen for months. When they finally broke apart, breathless, she rested her forehead against his. "Welcome back," she whispered. 1 year later, the autumn sun cast a golden glow over Bridgewater Park. The leaves were a riot of red and gold, and the air was crisp with the promise of a new season. On a blanket spread near a large oak tree, Evangeline and Aria unpacked a picnic basket. A few yards away, Rowan pushed a laughing Clara on a swing, her legs pumping as she flew higher and higher. She wasn't flying in her wheelchair anymore. She was flying for real. They had become a family, their lives weaving together so seamlessly it felt as if they had always been this way. The mansion was now a home filled with the laughter of two girls who had become inseparable sisters. Rowan's work at Hawthorne Industries was revolutionary, and his partnership with Evangeline had made the company more successful and more compassionate than ever before. Later, as the girls chased each other across the lawn, their joyful shrieks filling the air, Rowan came and sat on the blanket beside Evangeline. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "Do you remember that day?" he asked, his voice low, nodding toward the spot where Aria had choked. "I was so scared. I thought I had just thrown away my daughter's entire future to save a stranger. And instead," she prompted, her eyes soft. "And instead," he said, turning to face her, his gaze full of a love that was deep and unwavering, "I found my own future. And hers. And ours." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Evangeline's breath hitched. "I didn't run into a crisis that day, Evangeline," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant diamond ring. "I ran into my destiny. I love you. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy welled in her eyes as she looked from the ring to the man who had saved her daughter, saved her company's soul, and saved her from a life of loneliness. She looked at their daughters, a perfect, happy picture of the family they had built together. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of all the love in her heart. "Yes, Rowan." 1,000 times, yes, he slipped the ring onto her finger, and as the girls came running back to see what was happening, he pulled her in for a kiss. It was a kiss of promises kept and new promises made, a perfect circle of a story that had started right here, in this very park, with a single, selfless act of kindness that had blossomed into a love bigger and brighter than either of them had ever dared to dream. If you're hearing this, it means you stayed to the very end. Thank you. That honestly means the world to me. I really hope you got something out of it. Maybe a new way of looking at things, a moment of peace, or just a good escape from the everyday. If you did, I'd genuinely love to hear about it in the comments. You see, we're on a mission here, to prove that deep, meaningful stories still have a place in this world. When you subscribe, it's like you're telling us, keep going. When you hit that like button, you're giving the story a little push so it can find the next person who might need it. Don't forget those notifications so you know when the next one is ready. From me to you, thank you for being here. Carry the best parts of this one with you.